Good evening. Hope all of you are doing well. Let's get started. We're learning Maseches Succah Daf Lamed Beis. We're starting 5 lines from the bottom on Lamed Aleph Amud Beis, just so you have a little bit of an appreciation of what we've accomplished and what we're going to accomplish. Yes, thank you. If you flip back just 2 blot to Chav Tes Amud Beis in the Mishnah, we spent the first 2 blot discussing the following 4 words: Lulav Hagazol, V'Hayavesh Pasol. That's all we discussed. And then what we're going to be doing for the rest of today is discussing the rest of the Mishnah all the way until the Mishnah on Lamed Beis, Amud Beis, and then we will be stopping at that Mishnah. Okay, so here we go. We're 5 lines from the bottom, Lamed Aleph, Amud Beis. Our Mishnah had said, Shel Asherah v'Shel Ir Hanidachas, that if the lulav had come from an Asherah tree or from an Ir Hanidachas, a city where most of the people were idol worshippers, then in those cases the halacha would be that the lulav is pasal. Okay, so we have to analyze this. Says the Gemara, B'Shel Asherah pasal. You're saying that if something comes off of an Asherah tree, off of a tree that was worshipped for avodah zarah, you're saying that it's pasal. How can that be? Ve'amar Rava said, lulav shel avodah zarah lo yitol. It is appropriate that one should not use a lulav for avodah zarah. However, v'im natal kosher. But if in fact you did, the halacha is you're still yotze, the mitzvah of the daled minim. So it seems from Rava that you are, albeit b'di'evid, you are allowed to use a lulav that comes from an Asherah tree. So says the Gemara, Hacha, what are we talking about in our Mishnah? Hacha be'Asherah de Moshe askinan. Here we're talking about an Asherah that Moshe Rabbeinu paskindan. Take a look at Rashi, about 10 lines from the bottom, Dibur Hamaschel be'Asherah de Moshe. And Rashi says, Osam shahayu b'shas kibush Eretz Yisrael. These are the Asherah trees that were taken over in the conquest of the Jewish people on Eretz Yisrael. Shehitzricha nakasu sreifa, where the Torah says about those trees that they need to be burned. The lulav tzarich shiur, and a lulav has to have a minimum shiur. We're going to spend a lot of time on the Amud Beis today of Daf Lamed Beis Amud Beis discussing the shiur of a lulav. And here it's as though there is no shiur, because in regards to the Asherah trees by Moshe, he paskined that they should be burned. And because he paskined that they should be burned, so therefore it's as if they don't exist anymore, and therefore there's no shiur, and kevan de la sreifa kai, therefore there's nothing left to talk about. So 3 lines from the bottom, Lamed Aleph Amud Beis, back in the Gemara, Hacha be'Asherah de Moshe askinan, in our Mishnah, where we are makbid, that one should not use a lulav from an Asherah tree, that's referencing an Asherah tree upon which Moshe paskined sreifa. And therefore, says the Gemara, it's as if its shiur has already been destroyed. The lulav is not big enough because that tree, halachically speaking, doesn't exist anymore. And says the Gemara, Dekanami, this is actually proven correct by a brisa as well. Dekatani, as the brisa writes, Dumya de Ir Hanidachas, Shmamina, similar to an Ir Hanidachas, and the same halacha was applied there. So we have 2 worlds of Asherah. The language of our Mishnah, which indicates that an Asherah tree is puzzled just like an Ir Hanidachas, that's referencing a case of a michtas shiure where Moshe paskined that it's a sreifa, it has to be burnt. However, if it didn't have a psak on it yet, then the halacha is that if you took a lulav from an Asherah tree, itaka would be mutter, like the Gemara's opening question, 5 lines from the bottom of the page. That brings us to the 2 dots of niktam rosho. Now we're getting into some of the detailed halachos about a lulav. And in regards to the top of a lulav, we all know what a lulav looks like. Just imagine the top inch, whatever it is, and they remove the top inch of the. They do this, by the way, in chinuch cases. For a chinuch lulav sorghum, sometimes they passel them intentionally. Okay, fine. So let's assume that that's the case here. They cut it at the top. Aval, what's the? Let me read the words first. Niktam rosho. Amar Rav Huna lo shanu ela niktam. When the Mishnah says that niktam rosho is passel, that's only if it's cut. However, aval nista kosher. But if it has a crack in one of the leaves at the top, Rashi here indicates, and we'll see why this is important. Rashi 3 lines from the bottom writes, Nistiku roshe ha'alin, just the tops of the leaves have a crack in them. Those are kosher. That's what Rav Huna says. Asks the Gemara, the nista kosher, if the tops of the leaves have a crack in them, if they're split down the middle, so then they're going to be kosher. How can that be? The Hatanya, we have a brisa that writes, lulav kafuf, if the top of the lulav is bent over on itself, kavutz, if it has, as Rashi indicates at the top, thorns sticking out of it, or saduk, or if it's cracked, which is a problem, or akum dome lemagel, or if it, from a profile, if it is kind of hooked like you'd see like a sickle, so then all of those cases are puzzle. Now, Rav Huna wanted to infer from our Mishnah that when it says niktam rosho, Only niktam is problematic, but nistak, if it has a tear in it, then the leaf would still be kosher. But this brisa on the top of Lamed Beis Amud Aleph is very clear that saduk is part of the list, and it indicates that if it's saduk, that it's going to be puzzle. So we have a contradiction between Rav Huna's understanding of our Mishnah and this brisa. So says the Gemara, just finishing off the brisa, charus pasal, that if it were to have been a very hard material of wood, it would be pasal, and doma lacharus kasher, had it been similar to that hardwood but softer, then maybe that would still be a kosher lulav. So this brisa is problematic for the shita of Rav Huna. Amar Rav Papa. Rav Papa says, how do we answer this case? The avid hemnek. What we're talking about is a hemnek. What is a hemnek? Take a look at Rashi. Amar Rav Papa, ha-de-katani saduk pasol, that which we said in this brisa at the very top of Lamed Beis Amud Beis, that when there is a crack in one of the leaves that it's pasol, lav sheniztiku roshe alin o shidra, it's not talking about where the leaves are broken. Ela da'avidi ki hemnek. It's made like a hemnek, which is a particular tool, which he calls here putes for, shel barzel shel sofrim. It was a tool that people who were writing Sifrei Torah would use. Rashi indicates 6-7 lines down, sheyesh lo shnei rosh, and it looked like the letter Y. It was a tool that you would use as the letter Y. They would use it for sirtut. So sirtut, if you ever look inside of a Sefer Torah, the Sefer Torah is kept extremely neat because there's a din in regards to writing Sifrei Torah that one must do sirtut, and that is to etch lines into the parchment, and then the sofer will use those lines to keep everything straight. The tool that they used was this hemnik, this tool that had multiple prongs to it. If you could imagine, 2 would be easy, right? So you just do 2 lines, and then you readjust and do 2 more lines. So if the lulav looks like that, it's split like that, that's when it's less problematic. But in the case where it is problematic, right, so let me say that again. If it's David Hemnek, so then Rashi says El Daviki Hemnek, so that in that case, Mefutzal, Rashi indicates over here, Shel Barzel, Shel Sovrim, okay, right, does it say here which one is which? Lakan umachsis alav lakan. So that's what he's saying, is that there's 2 different types of saduk, and the one that we're talking about in our Mishnah is correct. The Rav Huna is of the opinion that if the leaf splits at the top, it's mutter. We're going to speak about the famous discussion that we are all familiar with about the tiomes. The tiomes is the 2 leaves, which really is 1 leaf at the very top, the topmost leaf. When we pick up lulavim to check on them, that's often one of the first things that we look at. Is the tiomes, which is really 2 leaves fused together, is it still connected? So we like when it's connected all the way to the top. That's mehudar. What if it splits a little bit? That's this discussion. We're going to see how far that psul will go. We'll discuss that in a little bit. And then says the Gemara, what about akum dome lemagel? What if there is a curvature at the top of the lulav such that it looks like a sickle? So Amar Rava says, lo amran ela lefanav. The only psul is if when you're holding the lulav and the shidra is facing you, that the curvature is away from you. That is problematic. Aval la'achorav, but if the curve is back towards you, then b'riyasahu, that is a normal way for this to grow. Amar Rav Nachman, what about if the curvature of the lulav is to the right or to the left? Let's dadav. So let's dadin. So then there's 2 approaches. Rav Nachman version 1 says kilefan of dami. It's as if it's away from you, in which case it's pasal. The Amrei La, some say that Rav Nachman said really is kila achar of dami. That really it's if a lulav is tilted to the right or to the left, if it's as if it's tilted upwards, in which case it would be kosher. So that's unclear from the Gemara. And let's learn one more case that's very similar to all of this. 5-6 lines down, Lamed Beis Amud Aleph. B'amar Rava, hi lulava. If you have a lulav, the salik bechad hutza, that all of the growth is on either one side or the other, but it doesn't grow evenly, right side and left side. So the leaves are not, it's not just that they're not symmetrical. The leaves are only on one side. That says the Gemara is bal mumhu upasel. There's something wrong with that. That is not a normal lulav, and it is not considered kosher. What about nifritzu alav? So if we were to look back in our Mishnah at the beginning of the perek, what does it say about nifritzu alav? That if the leaves are spread out, the Mishnah says nifritzu alav is pasal, but nifridu, so we'll have to see what these terminologies mean. So what's nifritzu? So the Gemara says, why is this pasal? Amar Rav Papa, nifritzu da'avid kichufya. You made a broom out of it. How did they make a broom back in the day? They would take a material like a lulav, they'd peel off all of the strips from the side, they'd make it down so that the lulav is nothing anymore. They take those pieces, they tie it around a stick, and that would be their broom, right? When we were younger, we had these kinds of brooms in a similar form, but with much thinner pieces of whatever the material was, plastic, wood, whatever it was. And so we're like familiar with that look. It's kind of like the witch's broom, if you've ever seen a movie, those kinds of things, if ever. And then that's what it's saying is absolutely puzzle. For sure, that's going to be puzzle. And to be specific and clear is if you tear all of the branches off of a lulav and reattach them with a rope, that's no longer a lulav. That is what the Gemara means as quoting the Mishnah when it says nifritzu alav. Nifridu, what if they just spread out, but still connected? They were never torn off. So that's the ifru difrude, that's if they just spread out, but they're still connected at the shidra, at the spine. That's considered fine. Boy Rav Papa, nechlaka tiyomes mahu. What about the very top leaf, the one that I referenced earlier? What if it is split? And here, Rashi is very clear. Rashi is almost halfway down. Dibur hamaschal nechlaka tiyomes. Rashi here says toward the end of that Rashi that we're talking about one where the crack in that top leaf goes all the way down to the bottom. That's what we're talking about nechlakat yomes. Ma, what's the din? So let's see. Tashma, we're about 12 lines down. Lamed Bezim at Aleph to Amar Rav Yochanan, Amar Rav Yoshua ben Levi. Nitla hatiyomes pasal. Had the tiyomes been cut off, so then we would have said that for sure it's pasal. My love, isn't it also the case that who adin nechlaka? We should then have assumed that maybe the splitting of the tiyomes down to that very low part where it meets the shedra, that also should be pasal. So says the Gemara back to this havamina. No, lo. Maybe we should say nitla shiny dahachaserle. Maybe we should say cutting off the top of the tiyomes. That's different. That's chaser. But here, nothing's chaser. Okay, it's just split, but it's not a big deal. So they're not a good raya from here. Yikada Amre, third of the way down. Maybe there was another version of Rav Yochanan. Amar Rav Yochanan, Amar Rav Yoshua ben Levi, nechlaka tiyomes nasa kimishin nitla tiyomes upasal. This is more clear that if there is a split in the tiyomes, we halachically equate it to as though it had been cut off, and therefore it is going to be pasal. We are, of course, makbid on it. I believe though the way we look at it is that if there's one tefach of break in it, that's problematic. So we should try to. Sometimes you've seen these lulavim that have these like ties all the way up, like this netting tie of that same material of lulav that's all the way up to the top, so that you can't open the tiyomis at all, so that it could never split. Is that a heat or is that not? Ask your local Orthodox rabbi. That brings us to the two dots, just about halfway down. On Lamed Beis Amud Aleph, and says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Yagdanu Milamala. Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion that you need to tie the lulav at its top. Tanya, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, we saw this already. Mishum Rabbi Tarfon, kapos tamarim, because the pasuk said kapos tamarim, and we a little play on words. What does kapos mean? Kafus im hayaparod yechaftenu. That if there is a need to tie it at the top, you should tie it at the top. So kapos tamarim is a play on the word of kafus, that it needs to be tied at the top. That is shitas Reb Yehuda. So Amar le Ravina the Ravashi mimai the high kafos tarim dilulavahu. The next 10 lines of Gemara are not only essential in regards to determining what a lulav is, but it's one of these Gemaras where if somebody says, how in the world did you Jews figure out that this is what the Bible meant? So the next 10 lines of Gemara will tell us how we figure it out, what exactly a lulav is, and why, when we walk around with these little lulavim in our hands, we know that we're doing Ratzon Hashem with clarity. These 10 lines of Gemara are very helpful for us to understand this. And says the Gemara as follows. Ravina says to Ravashi, how do we know the high kapos tamarim dilulavahu? How do we know that it's this part of the tree? Ema charusa. Maybe I should have said that it's one of the hard parts of the trees. If you ever look at a palm tree, Rashi goes through this. There's a lot of Rashis to read today, so I'm going to skip the ones that I can. But on a palm tree towards the top, you see these like slight pieces of wood coming out at the edges at slight outward angles. Well, those all started as lulavim. Over the course of time, the looser branches fell off and these hardened into wood. So the Gemara says, who says that it's the fresh lulav at the top? Maybe it's the very old lulav that hardened into a piece of wood that's now at the sides of the tree as the bark of the tree. That's what the Gemara is recommending here. It says the Gemara, Ema charusa. Says the Gemara, no, but ina kafus fileka. That can't be because there's nothing to bind. There's no kafus, but the way Rabbi Yehuda learned the pasuk was like the way that Rabbi Tarfon understood the pasuk, that kapos tamarim is kafus, but there's nothing to tie it. It doesn't spread out into branches, so that can't be it because it fails the litmus test of being able to be tied. The lema ufta. What's ufta? So this is also it's also similar to this, but not quite the same because it is something that's branchable. Two parts of a palm tree that can be pulled together. So it says the Gemara, kafus michlal deika parud. No, that's not true. Here too, the piece of wood that they're referring to is it's a little different. It's a part of the root of the tree. But he says here too that there's no way to separate them in order for them to be tied. It's permanently this way. So here too, it fails a litmus test of being able to be tied. Says the Gemara, fine, ve'ema kufra. Maybe we should say that we're talking about kufra. Take a look at Rashi, 2 lines before the wide lines. Rashi says, ve'ema kufra, hainu nami eitz ke'ein charusa, ela adayin ben shana o ben o shtei shanim. Velonis ave eitzo. It's not that thick. It is bendable wood. Maybe we should say that wood is the wood we should be using for a lulav. Says the Gemara, you cannot say that. Amar Abaye, you can't use that wood for a lulav and esrog because because the Torah teaches us that when we do mitzvos, they have to be derecheh darchei noam. And what's not noam about this? What's not pleasant? So the Meforshim point out that kufra is very thorny and uncomfortable to hold. And therefore, this also can't be the lulav that we are talking about. Amar le Rava Tosva le Ravina. Rava Tosva says to Ravina, ve'ema tarte kape de tamre. Maybe it's actually 2 branches that actually hold the dates on the tree. Right? We're going through every part of the tree, trying to figure out how do we're like ruling things out one after the other to indicate what is the actual lulav. Maybe we should look at 2 branches of tamarim. Says the Gemara, you're right that we read the pasuk kapos, but it looks like kapas, and therefore it can't be 2 different things we tie together. It has to only be one with multiple branches. Fine, maybe we should say it is 1 cluster of dates, and then we take all of the extending branches and we tie it up, and that's kapos. We can tie that up. Says the Gemara, that also doesn't work. Says the Gemara, leahu kaf karile. You got the wrong gender. It's not kapas. It's kaf in the singular and in the male, and therefore that doesn't work either. And therefore, and an important therefore, which is not listed in the Gemara, but therefore we now know that there's no other parts of the tree that can be the lulav. It must therefore be the part that we know of as the lulav, and therefore our Gemara concludes accordingly. Our Mishnah on Chav Tesam at Beis at the new Perek had indicated that there was a certain type of lulav that grew in a place called Har Barzel. And Sine Har Barzel Ksher, our Mishnah had said 5-6 lines from the bottom on Lamed Beis and Aleph that these types of lulavim in the Har Barzel were Kshera. Amar Abaye says, but there's still a rule, even if it's a very small lulav. But Amar Abaye lo shanu ela sherosho shel zeh magia letzad ikaro shel zeh. That when you have a leaf, the leaf that is below has to overlap with the. So if this is one leaf, then it has to be. They can't be separated. They have to overlap a little bit, and then the next one have to overlap a little bit. So as the lulav extends higher and higher, all of the leaves must overlap. That is a minimal requirement halachically for a lulav. So says the Gemara in Sine Har Barzel, even though they're very short lulavim, but as long as the leaves overlap one another, going top to bottom, so then that is not a problem. Aval, 4 lines from the bottom, Ein Rosho Shel Zeh Magil Tzadikro Shel Zeh Pasul. But if it were to be the case that the lulav was made in such a way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu built this lulav such that the leaves at the bottom didn't touch the ones above them, that is not kosher. Tanya Nami Hachi, the Brisa seems to agree with this. And what we're going to see over the next 5 or 6 lines is 3 versions of the same exact conversation with the same conclusion. Tanya Nami Hachi, what does the Brisa write? Sine Har Barzel Psula. That's against our Mishnah. What about our Mishnah that says Kshera? So our Mishnah says Kshera, this new brisa that they're bringing up here that says Psula. Rather, the way we must interpret the difference between our Mishnah, which says that Sine Har Barzel is Kshera, and the brisa that says that Sine Har Barzel is Psula, is whether or not the leaves overlap. If the leaves overlap, it's kosher. That is our Mishnah. And if the leaves don't overlap, that is Psula. That is the brisa. And that brings us to the top of Lamed Beis and Mud Beis, where we see yet another version of this same exact Shiloh. Vika de Rami Lamirma, some raise these 2 sources against one another, but in the opposite direction. Tanan, our Mishnah writes, Sine Har Barzel kasher. It's nice that our Mishnah says it's kosher, but there's a brisa that says it's pasul. Amar Abaye lo kasher kanche rosho shel zeh magil etzadi karo shel zeh kanche ein rosho shel zeh magil etzadi karo shel zeh. Same exact answer, that as long as the leaves below overlap the bottom of the leaves above them, so then the lulav will be kosher. Masha ein kain, if the leaves don't, then they will not be kosher. Amar Rabbi Marion, Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, very early in the times of the Amoraim, Va'amrei latani Rabba bar Mari Mishum Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, even earlier back to the times of the Tanaim. So we just know it's super early. Shtei Tamaros yesh begei ben Hinnom. There are 2 date trees in Gei ben Hinnom, which is a valley called Ben Hinnom. Ve'ole ashan mi benehem, and smoke emanates from between them. V'zehu sheshaninu. These are the palm trees that we are talking about when we call them Tzini Har Habarzel Ksheros. These 2 palm trees in the valley of Ben Hinnom, those are the ones that have the halachic identification of Tzini Har Barzel. And as well, the Zohi Pischa Shel Gehenim. This is one of the portals to Gehenim. Okay, we don't know exactly what that means. Is it a physical thing? If people die, do they roll their spirits? Don't know. Don't know. Field trip. No field trip. I don't want to find out. I don't want to find out where the opening of Gehenna is, but we'll go to the Kotel maybe as a chabura.
I'll let you know.
I don't even know what I'm supposed to say right now. Okay. It says the Gemara 10 lines down. Lamed Beis, Amud Beis. We're going to get into a slightly mathematical sugya. This will bring us to the Mishnah, which is about 2/3, 3/4 of the way down, and then we'll stop here. Let us get into this sugya. Says the Gemara, Lulav sheyesh bo shlosha tfachim. Our Mishnah says that it has to have at least 3 tfachim. The lulav has to be 3 tfachim. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel says, Shir hadas ve'arava shlosha. That when it comes to the hadasim and the aravos, they need to be 3 tfachim. The lulav arba'a, and the lulav needs to be 4, different than our Mishnah. Kedei sheyehe lulav yotze min hahadas tefach. Because in addition to the fact that we have a halacha that the hadasim and aravos have to be 3, we have a separate halacha that the lulav has to extend 1 tefach more than the hadasim and the aravos. And as well, not mentioned here, we also know that the hadasim have to be above the aravos. We have a lot of different mathematics going on. When you see a lulav, we have to know that it has a minimum height. We have to know the leaves overlap one another. All the halachos about the tiomes that we just learned. And we know the hadasim are on the right with the shidra facing you and the aravos on the left. The hadasim have to be slightly above the aravos. And from the top here to the top of the lulav has to be yet another tefach. A lot of halachos to know in regards to a lulav and esrog. So says the Gemara as follows. At the 2 dots, I'll just start again. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel that shir hadas ve'arava, they have to be shlosha v'lulav arba, so that it's 1 tefach longer. Kadesh lulav yotze min hadas tefach. Very good. However, Rabbi Parnach Amar Rabbi Yochanan, he says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, shidro shalulav tzarich sheyotze min hadas tefach. Forget about the top of the lulav. The shidra of the lulav has to be a tefach above, which is a much taller lulav because the leaves can extend for many tfachim above the shidra. So the shidra is the very, very dark green part. It does taper out at some point where it then just all becomes leaf and really thins out to just be the tiomis at the very tip of the lulav. But the shita here of Rabbi Parnach in the name of Rabbi Yochanan is a chumrah. It's a taller lulav. Shidra shalulav tzarich sheyetze min hadas tefach. So says the Gemara, hold on one second. Tanan, we have a Mishnah. Lulav sheyesh bo gimel tfachim kedei lena'aneo bo kasher. We have a Mishnah. This Mishnah is our Mishnah at the beginning of our parak. What does it say? A lulav has to have 3 tfachim so that you can do na'anuim. Yet both of these previous shitas, Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan, say that it has to be either 4 tfachim, or it has to be that the shedra is a tefach more. The shedra is going to be 4 tfachim plus. So it's either 4 or 4 plus, but neither of them say 3. So our Mishnah is a kasha. So it says the Gemara, just a slight touch to solve this problem, a third of the way down. Ema, how should we read our Mishnah? Yes, it does need to be 3, but it also has to have enough to be mina'anea. How much do you need to be mina'anea? Well, we have to look back at Shmuel and look back at Rabbi Yochanan. And Shmuel says that it's a little bit more. It has to be a tefach more than the hadasim. And Rabbi Yochanan says that the shedra has to be a tefach more than the hadasim with still more to go. So then it's not a stira. Our Mishnah is not a stira. It only references one factor and not all of the factors. Tashma, says the Gemara, shiur hadas ve'arava shlosha v'lulav arba. As we saw in the beginning of this sugya, 10 lines down, here we're seeing it again, that the hadasim and the aravos have to be 3, and the lulav has to be 4. My love bahade alin. Isn't this a kasha and Rabbi Yochanan? Doesn't it seem from here that 4 is a minimum number? And Rabbi Yochanan was of the opinion that the shedra has to be 4, and you don't need there to be any high. That's incorrect. That would be a stira according to this. Rabbi Yochanan would not be understood. He says, Gemara, lo levad me alin. Rabbi Yochanan would learn this brisa to say, no, I'm only talking about the shedra. I'm not talking about the alin, and therefore the numbers work out the same. So Gufa, now the Gemara is going to dig into this halacha a little bit more. Gufa shir hadas ve'arava shlosha v'lulav harba. We had said, we're almost halfway down Lamed Beis and Beis. We had said that the shir of the hadasim and the arava is 3 tefach each. The lulav arba, and the lulav has to be 4. What does Rabbi Tarfon say? Rabbi Tarfon omer be'ama bas chamisha tfachim. What does that sound like? That it has to be 5 tfachim. A little bit of a strange language. Be'ama bas chamisha tfachim. That we're talking about an amma of 5 tfachim. But why is he talking about an amma? We're only talking in shiurim of tefach. So we're going to dig into this language in a moment. So Amar Rava says, according to my understanding of Rabbi Tarfon, says the Gemara, Sharale Mari le Rabbi Tarfon. The master, namely HaKadosh Baruch Hu, capital M, should forgive Rabbi Tarfon. He made a mistake. We could barely find any hadassim that are 3 tefach long. Bas chamisha miboya. You think we're going to find a whole tree enough to service all of Klal Yisrael with 5 tefachim? It just can't be. What Rabbi Tarfon said can't be. It just can't be right that we need them to be 5 tefachim. There's just not a metzias like that. What was he talking about? That's not the way hadassim grow in general. There's no way that could be it. So Rava clearly understood Rabbi Tarfon's line of Rabbi Tarfon Omer ba'ama bas chamisha tefachim, that the hadassim had to be 5 tefachim. But says the Gemara, that's not true. And really, Rava misunderstood Rabbi Tarfon. So says the Gemara, here is answer number 1, which will get rejected, and then we'll come to answer number 2, with which we will conclude. Halfway down. Ki asa Rav Dimi, Omar, he said as follows. No, you misunderstood. What Rav Tarfon was talking about when he said that there's an Amma Bas Chamisha Tfachim is that when we talk about the Tfachim of the Hadassim, are we talking about the Tfachim of an Amma Bas Chamisha or an Amma Bas Shisha? If you're talking about tefachim of an amma bas chamisha, each tefach is a little bigger. Let's assume an amma is this. You break this up into 5 parts or into 6 parts. The distance between my hands won't change. It's still an amma. So that means that the amma bas chamesh has tefachim that are larger. And if you cut this into 6 pieces and each section is smaller, then each tefach is smaller. So what Rabbi Tarfon was saying is as follows. Normally we talk about bas shisha tefachim aso bas chamisha. Here, instead of looking at the normal tefach, which is bas shisha, where they're a little bit smaller, each tefach is smaller. Here we're talking about an amma, which is bas chamisha, where each tefach is a little bit larger. So if you take an amma that was 6 parts, and then you break the lines into only 5 parts, so now each tefach is 1 1/5 of an amma of that measurement. The numbers change because the total distance didn't change, but your breakdown changed. If you started with 6 breaks, and now we have only 5 breaks, so then each tefach is 1 1/6. So says the Gemara as follows. If you take 3 of those tefachim, 3 measurements of those tefachim, that would be 3 times 1 1/5, which will be 3 3/5, as the Gemara will indicate clearly. So so how many tefachim would the hadassim be? Says the Gemara, it would be 3 1/3 based on the math that we just did. But if you say that, this is kasha de Shmuel ad Shmuel, because our initial impression of Shmuel was amar Rav Yehuda amar Shmuel shiur hadas v'arava shlosha. Initially, he said that the shiur was only 3 tefachim. But in this new version, quoting Rabbi Tarfon, amar Rav Huna amar Shmuel halacha Rabbi Tarfon, who said that it was 3 3/5. So which one is it? Do we say that the shiur of the hadassim is 3, like Shmuel said in a simplistic form? Or do we say, like Shmuel's version number 2, that he quotes Rabbi Tarfon, to say that it's 3 3/5 tefachim? Which one is the shiur? So says the Gemara, it's the same thing, lo duck. He was being inexact. It was just being inexact. 3 3/5. It's not a big deal, not a big difference. Says the Gemara, Eimar de amri non lo dak lechumra. I could understand if you want to tell me that you're just being inexact, you have to do it in a way where you're generating a chumrah. But lekula mi amri non lo dak. Think about it this way. Let's say really the halacha was 3 3/5. That's the minimum height of hadassim. Comes along Shmuel and says it just needs to be 3, and I'm being inexact. Yeah, but if the real shiur is 3 3/5, and you're loosely saying 3, you're going to have a lot of people with non-kosher hadassim, because really the shiur is 3 3/5. If you're going to ballpark lechumra, not lekula. So that's what the Gemara says. Emar damrinan lo dak lechumra. If you want to say that you're just being inexact, I could understand if you're going to be strict. Say 4. Don't say 3 3/5. Say 4. Fine. But lekula, you're going to say 3. Mi amrinan lo dak. That you're just being inexact, and the real shiur is larger. That doesn't work. Therefore, says the Gemara, we flip around our math. Ki asa Ravin Amar Amma bas chamisha tfachim asa osa shisha. Instead of looking at the tfachim as an amma bas chamisha, we take the amma that you had broken up into 5, and now we break it up instead into 6 parts, which means that each tefach is less than the tefach of the amma bas chamisha. And 3 of those, as we will soon see, is not even a real full 3 tefachim of a bas chamisha. So how would it work out? If you had 3 tefachim that were broken up in this smaller shiur, it's treyu pauda. It's going to be 2.5 tefachim as the height of the hadassim. So it says the Gemara, even if you say that, sof at the end of the day, kasha de Shmuel ad Shmuel, because Shmuel presented 3, and now with this new math, it's really only 2.5. Says the Gemara, here's where we say lo duck. This is where we say lo duck, because what does Shmuel say? 3. What's the real answer? 2.5. Good. So then you're just being machmir when you say lo duck. He's not giving the decimal point. Just make sure that they're 3 tvachim. So it's a chumrah. And Medina, technically, Shmuel would say that if you were to have hadassim that were not 3 tvachim, they were only 2.5, they would be kosher. But he was teaching in shiur, just make it 3. This is a stringency in approximation, and that's totally fine. To Amar Rav Huna, Amar Shmuel, halacha ki Rabbi Tarfon, that the halacha is like Rabbi Tarfon, which is really technically speaking 2.5 tefach, that's enough. But lo dak, he was just being machmir to say 3, and we will stop right here at this Mishnah, pick up at this Mishnah tomorrow and learn to the next Mishnah tomorrow night. I will not be here on Wednesday. I don't yet know what I'm doing for, I'll probably pre-record and post, I'll let you know. But I think that's it for tonight. Wishing you all a beautiful night.